I thought I'd talk about an hour and a half, if that's okay, just to wrap the proceedings up. It's been a fantastic evening, hasn't it? I'm very honoured to be in this company. I should start with an apology, really, because I'm not a scientist, I'm not a technologist, I have nothing to do with space except being in it. I'm an educator by trade, so to speak. I do have something in common with Arthur C. Clarke, apart from huge admiration for him, which is we're both British. I think this could be a criterion for all future nominees for this award, frankly. I think it narrows the field beautifully. We have another thing in common, actually, which is we both had polio, which is curious. He got it later in his life. The other thing is that Arthur C. Clarke's life was very improbable. Don't you feel? I mean, he was born in Somerset, in England. He went on to revolutionize the way we think about science and technology, but lived most of his life in Sri Lanka, which we used to think of as Ceylon. I was born in Liverpool in 1950. I now live in Los Angeles. And I have been a great admirer of Arthur C. Clarke all of my life, mainly through his movies and his books. I have had very little to do with satellites. But my own trajectory is equally improbable, but I say it in the firm belief that yours is too. I mean, how many of you anticipated the life that you've actually had when you were at school? Did you? One. In all of its detail, where you live, what you've done, that's admirable. But it's a small minority. I think it's not true of most people, I would say. And the reason I think it's not true of most people, in detail, and I doubt it's really true of you, is that you can't predict your own life. You can anticipate it, but we actually create our lives. We create them from our own talents and our own circumstances, and each of our lives is unique. It's a unique trajectory. You don't get your resume with your birth certificate. You earn that later on. Of course, what happens is you come to write your resume and you impose a structure on it to make it look as if it was all a plan. Don't you? Because when you're trying to impress future employers or people who might have some sway over your life, you don't want to give the impression in your resume that you've been living through the actual chaos you've been experiencing. That you're kind of skipping one log to the next. And I say this for a particular reason, which is, and why I'm so pleased to be given this award in the name of imagination, is that imagination seems to me to be the distinctive human quality. In most respects, we're like the rest of life on Earth. And as Vince said, 90% of us is bacterial. Not necessarily the relatives we're looking for, but in most respects, we're like the rest of life on Earth. And we've come to persuade ourselves, and particularly in the past 300 years, in many cases, we've persuaded ourselves that we're very different from the rest of life on Earth. Because we meet in buildings like this, and we wear suits and clothes, and we have space shuttles and satellites. But in most respects, we're exactly the same. We depend upon the Earth. We're organic creatures. We live and we die. We can only live in certain circumstances, within very narrow conditions, normally. But in one respect, we're very different from the rest of life on Earth. And I think it's probably the particular power that's given rise to all the other things that we've come to think of as unique to us. We have powerful imaginations. It's part of our birthright as human beings. Let me say what I mean by imagination. I mean the ability to bring into mind things that aren't present to our senses. In imagination, we can revisit the past. We can reinterpret the past. We can rethink the past. That's really what history is, isn't it? I mean, if history were just a catalogue of past events, there'd be no need for faculties of historians. We'd simply need clerks to keep track of what's been going on. But history is a contest for meaning. It's a contest for the past. But with imagination, we can also enter the consciousness of other people, virtually. We can see it as they see it. We can feel as they feel, or we can attempt to. We can empathize. And imagination seems to me to be the seat of empathy. It's not a coincidence, I think, that leaders, when they want to oppose an enemy, give as their top priority the suppression of empathy for the enemy. It's only when we lose empathy for people that we can do things that are literally unimaginable. But with imagination, we can also anticipate the future. And therefore, as Vince said, quoting Alan, we can help to bring it about. I don't think we can predict the future. Not terribly well. Arthur C. Clarke was actually rather impressive. H.G. Wells was also quite impressive too. But in human affairs, you may be able to predict the course of technology. You may be able to look a little way out. But it's almost impossible to anticipate the cultural consequence of technology. I mean, Arthur C. Clarke was terrific, but he didn't think of Facebook, or Twitter. I'm not sure anybody should have thought of Twitter, really. I rather regret it. But you see, I wrote a book 10 years ago, I published it 10 years ago, called Out of Our Minds, Learning to be Creative. This book, by the way, is terrific. So you'd be foolish not to buy a copy of this book. But I produced a new edition of it last year, and the reason is that the publisher contacted me and said, we'd like to, it's 10 years old now since the book came out, and we'd like to do a new edition. Would you like to make any changes to it? Well, it seemed to me improbable I would want to change it. I mean, it was a masterwork. When all said and done, each word had been wrung from my consciousness. And I said, well, I'll have a quick look and see if there can be some minor grammatical changes. What I had in mind was a weekend with a spell check, really, and a bottle of Burgundy. But I actually rewrote the entire book from start to finish. There isn't a word unchanged. I mean, it's the same argument. But one of the reasons is, there are lots of reasons why I wanted to rewrite the whole thing, but one is that so much has happened in 10 years. Just in 10 years, think of it. I mean, I was born in 1950. We had 4 gadgets at home in 1950. Well, by the end of the 1960s, a telephone. We had that, and Arthur C. Clarke correctly anticipated that home computers would be as common as telephones. But we had a telephone. We got that in 1959. It was a party line. Do you remember party lines? Remember, well, you had maybe 20 other people sharing the same number, and there would be an operator who connected you, but it meant that everybody else sharing the same number could listen in on your conversation. And they did. Didn't they? It was like an early form of Facebook, I think, actually. We had a record player. We got that when I was 9, a dance set record player, and one record, the only one we had for about 3 months, which was Tom Dooley by the Kingston Trio. Do you remember that? And as it was the only record we had, we played it on every family occasion. Your cousin's getting married, Tom Dooley, I think. Your uncle's dead, Tom Dooley, I feel. It's a radio, we always had one of those, and a television. We got the television when I was 10 in 1960. It had 2 channels in black and white, both playing American programs. There was no remote control. Actually, we improvised a remote control. It was my young brother Neil, who we used to propel towards the set and say, change the channel or else. Anyway, it worked out very nicely. But in the last 10 years, the technological curve has already skyrocketed. 10 years ago, there were no iPhones, no smartphones, no iPads. The internet was still, coming alive. There was no Facebook, no Twitter. People didn't tweet, did they? 10 years ago, people didn't tweet. I mean, if you tweeted, you were discouraged, weren't you? Oh, no. If you tweeted in public, people would say, would you mind not doing that? And step outside if you feel compelled. All this in 10 years. Now, I'm saying you can anticipate the curve to some extent. Moore's law did it. You can, to some extent, anticipate the curve of technology. You cannot anticipate the cultural consequences, how people will pick these things up, what they'll do with it, how they'll turn it round, what change it will make. And the technologies that we've been celebrating here this evening have transformed the planet, not just technologically, but economically, culturally, materially, and to some degree spiritually. in ways that the architects of the technologies didn't anticipate. I'd like to ask Vint, I will over a drink, how much of the cultural consequences of the internet they could have anticipated at the beginning. Now, I'm saying this because all of these things are the product of human imagination, the ability to bring into mind things that aren't present to our senses. We can anticipate the future, but we can't predict it, not in the human world, in the material world to some degree. Now, other animals may have imaginations, I don't know. They may, but they don't manifest them, do they? And that's the key thing. I mean, if you have a dog, it may well have an imagination. I don't know. But it doesn't show it, does it? I mean, your dog may get depressed, but it doesn't listen to Miles Davis, does it? Yes, I mean, drink Jack Daniels and stare out the window reading Albert Camus, thinking, I got it real bad. I mean, we do those things, and you don't have to keep checking in with dogs to see what the latest thing is culturally, do you? On the whole, they're doing what they always did. There's nothing very fresh culturally happening with dogs. But with human beings, there's always something new, always something different. And the reason is that imagination has a series of very practical consequences, which we call creativity. Creativity is not the same thing as imagination, in my view. Imagination can be an entirely internal process. You can imagine all day long and never do anything. But to be creative, you have to do something. Creativity is very practical. You would never say of somebody, Susan's tremendously creative. Is that really what's she done? Well, nothing at all, as a matter of fact, but she lies in bed a great deal thinking. Creativity is the application of imagination. You can think of it that way, as applied imagination. It's putting your imagination to work. And it's in that sense that we create our own lives. Each of our lives is an individual path. But added together, we create cultures which are in turn revolutionary on our individual lives. I'd say my course I couldn't have planned, and I don't think you could have really planned yours in any great detail. But the power to create is fundamental to human achievement, and it's created a paradox. For most of human history, we've coexisted perfectly comfortably with the rest of life on Earth. But in the past 300 years, all of that has begun to change, and it's changing even more rapidly now. For most of human history, there are fewer than 1 billion people on the planet. That started to change about 300 years ago, the Industrial Revolution, as we got the hang of medicine and antibiotics and so on. And now we're approaching, we've just passed 7 billion people on Earth. We are the largest generation in human history, taking us all collectively. By the way, how many people do you think have ever lived? In the course, well, let me tie this down a bit for you. I'm talking about modern human beings. People like us. I'm not talking about creatures who go around on their knuckles, and with jutting jaws and high foreheads. I'm talking about groovy people, with profiles and a sense of irony. People like us. How many do you think there have been in the last 50,000 years? 100 billion, thank you. 10 billion? Okay, do I hear 50? All right, well, let me tell you. Nobody knows. All right? but of course not, because nobody's been counting, really, since the dawn of time. People haven't been taking censuses, just in case. But that said, serious statisticians have been trying to figure this out over the past number of years. Serious statisticians with no social life at all, presumably, have been trying to figure out, taking account of birth rates, patterns of epidemics, disease, wars, conflicts, etc. And you're right, the number varies between, if you Google this, by the way, which is what I did, you come to a figure somewhere between 60 and 110 billion. So let's split the difference, maybe a figure somewhere around 80 to 100 billion people have lived. The thing is that, I say, almost 10% of that number is on Earth right now. Of the total number of human beings, and we don't know if that's a sustainable idea. This is a rather small planet. Arthur C. Clarke once said very winningly that it's completely inappropriate to call this Earth. If you look at it from the outside, we should clearly call this ocean, since it is mostly ocean. So